1.094. Oh, ridiculous. I'm late! But just quickly, before we begin, you might still have time to enter the Cthulhu Death May Die giveaway that's happening on the other 5 reasons you shouldn't back Cthulhu. So go check that out. And why not hit the subscribe button while you're at it? Because if I get to 10,000 before the end of the year, I'll be giving away a copy of Oathsworn. But we're not talking about that or those 2 campaigns that have crossed that $1 million bar. This is the 5 reasons you shouldn't back Slay the Spire. And if you're new to the channel, welcome. Know that this series is not done out of ill will, just to try to get your views. I'm desperate for attention, but this is not one of those cases, or at least more than any other video where I'm desperate for your attention. No, this is a video series that I do whenever a campaign reaches over that $1 million bar, which Slay the Spire has done in less than 12 hours. It has hit $1.084 million at the time of recording this video. And I do these videos in order to put the brakes on for just a second, to tell you to cool your jets, spray cold water all over you like my mother would do at every school dance I would attend, and I'd just end up sopping wet on the dance floor. But this is a video series to evaluate your excitement, because there's nothing worse than getting swept up in the FOMO and the marketing of a campaign and hitting that back button, and then when the game arrives at your door a year and a half later, you not being that excited about it and just having the game that kind of sits on a shelf and doesn't jump to your table to play. My personal backing philosophy is when you're spending, a significant amount of money, as a lot of these Kickstarters are, you want to be actively excited about it. So I put this video series forward to put that excitement to the test, to ask a few questions and see if you are backing and will truly enjoy the game, or if perhaps you're getting swept up in the marketing or the hype or the excitement that comes with being a part of a massive Kickstarter campaign, because there is a level of excitement involved in these things. You get to say, yes, I was one of the lucky few who was responsible for putting this cool thing forward. And for some people, that might be enough. But for me, that's not enough. I need to be actively excited about the game and the gameplay specifically. But before getting into the reasons, I always like to talk about what excites me personally, so you know where I'm coming from, and so that I don't just jump right into being a mean person. I like to ease into it so you don't know that it's coming. And Slay the Spire is a game that I was really looking forward to. Or I suppose I can say I was looking forward to it, because I have the video game, I've played it on PlayStation, and I've enjoyed it. It brought deck building to a video game, one that I actively chose to play in my free time over a lot of other video games, as I'm sure many of you can relate to. And deck building is always a mechanic that I particularly enjoy. But the game is great. I think I have a few friends who enjoy it a little bit more than I do, but I love how all the different classes play. I love that you get to unlock things as you progress throughout the game, and that you can keep doing it over and over and finding new little twists and figuring out the most efficient pathway. The video game itself is fun, and I am incredibly intrigued and actually impressed by how faithful a rendering of that video game this game seems to be. The artwork of it makes me want to go and play the video game. I really like how the health point system seemed to be managed so far, because even in the few previews that I've watched through, you can see how that tension matters, and taking down those little villains really does seem like it will have an effect on the overarching success of your run. And so it was with a curious eye that I looked at the campaign page and was willing to be swayed one way or the other, depending upon a number of factors that usually sway me one way or the other. But there are a few hiccups that I'm not quite sure about that are making me lean in the direction of not purchasing it. So let's get into them right away. We know that Slay the Spire is a good video game, but should you get it as a board game? That's the real question here. And I think we all know that that should be the number one reason, and so we'll talk about that when we get to number 1, and I've spoiled it all for you. But it's not about the reasons, it's not about the title lines, it's about the substance to them. So hopefully I can provide a little bit of substance and offer a little bit more clarity as to the actual gameplay of it as well. And reason number 5 deals with that gameplay, and that is the idea that this is a game of death by 1,000 cuts. Even the video game is similar, but even as I liked the health points dwindling down and that you don't start with a large amount and the minions kind of keep piling up, I recognize that this is what kind of turned me off the game in the first place as well. I find with games with lots of waves of baddies, if those baddies aren't engaging enough and if they start to feel all sort of similar at that base minion level, the game starts to feel a little bit repetitive. And sometimes this is fine as long as the core loop is satisfying enough to you and keeps you engaged in the actions that you're doing and keeps you feeling super duper powerful and cutting down these swaths of demons and imps and gremlins and whatever. But sometimes it also feels like a little bit of bloat, for lack of a better word. Not necessarily that the game itself is bloated, but that these minions serve just to reduce your health, and that the reduction of your health is an inevitability and not something you can even work around. And when games give me that feeling, I felt that a little bit when I was playing through Skytear Horde, which was a game on Kickstarter that I did a review of as well. There were these little demons that kept on being put forward that you had to deal with, and whenever you dealt with them, they would always kind of chip off a point of health from your armor. And if you didn't deal with them, well, then they would just keep on chipping off those points, so you had to deal with them. And I get a similar feeling of progression through this, and that already makes me pause for the core gameplay loop. I like to talk about games as their gameplay loop, as to what you will be doing, and is that thing that you're doing fun enough to keep doing it for 2 hours or however long the game's going to take. And while the encounters do seem fast and furious, and I think they've done a lot to streamline the aspects of the game that I thought could be particularly tedious, and I think they should be commended for that, it is the gameplay aspect itself of having those little demons in there chipping away at your health that feels almost unnecessary as you progress through this dungeon. And you want the game to have all these levels because then, of course, it is more of a true representation of the video game. So this is sort of a critique of the video game and this current game. But when you're not getting the dopamine hit of getting loot from killing every baddie, which I think you are, or getting the choice to discover something new, which again is the purpose of these little encounters. You're going to get to draw some cards after every encounter and see what they dropped and see if you get new relics and see if you can power up your character. And that sort of character progression is fun. Sometimes the feeling of death by 1,000 cuts ends up being a bit of a slog. And so that is one of my fears with this game. That is what sort of stopped me playing through the video game as much as I would have liked. I thought it was something that I would be actively addicted to, and I am thankful that my addictive personality didn't latch onto it as such. Probably because I played on the PS4 and not on the Switch, where I could just lie on my back anywhere I was and crank out a game. But I think for those of you who haven't played the video game or the board game, or haven't tried it out on Tabletop Simulator or whatever, this is something that you need to be actively aware of, and think about in those other games if that aspect of it has ever been tedious to you, because my fear with this one is that it could end up being that similar tedium as you go through. Maybe not the first few times as you're getting to know all the baddies, but then when you are repeating it as this roguelike adventure goes, you might start to encounter that tedium. Which kind of brings me to my number 4, and again, we're going to talk about roguelike games. For those of you who haven't heard the term roguelike, this is a term for a game where every time you touch it or it touches you, it drains a little bit more of your life force until you're just an empty husk. No, sorry, different rogue. This is a game that stems from a video game of the same genre called Rogue, a 1980s dungeon crawling computer game that would generate these sort of procedurally generated dungeons that you could consistently go through with little tweaks to the system here and there. But in essence, it was the same thing that you were running through every single time. And this is an interesting point, he says to his own point. No, I think this is an interesting question to consider as well. The nature of this replayability. Obviously, the game is designed to be replayable. It's got 730 cards, plus cards, 20 more now that they've added those stretch goals. 4 different classes that I believe will play differently because they legitimately play differently, very differently in the video game. But there's a question of how much do you have to play, or how many differences do you have to have in each round to make the game different. And in a deck builder, this is why I like the genre, is you're always going to be playing with something a bit different. You literally have to play with the hand that you're dealt and do the best that you can with the grouping of cards that you have received and have added to over the course of the game. But the nature of Slay the Spire is that it is designed for you to complete and get something else really small and then complete again and get something else really small. And they actually do have a way to implement that. If you read through the rulebook on near the last page, there's a page of unlocks, and every time you complete a run with a specific character, you get to tick off a box. And once you've ticked off a certain number of rows, then you get to unlock this card pack, presumably that's in the game, that you aren't allowed to touch and open. I mean, you could just open it and play with all of them, but that defeats the point of this roguelike progression as you head through the game. But there can only be slight variation with these things. I like this system, I really do. I like this idea of unlocking things. It gives you a reason to come back to the game over and over and over again. But the fact remains that roguelike games are about this minimal progression and repeating the same thing over and over and getting better each time you do it. You know the foes that are going to come up, and so you know what to anticipate. You know the general idea of the foes that are going to come up, and so you know what to prep in order to anticipate defeating them. And so this acts as a puzzle, and for a lot of people that might really excite you as this puzzle to be solved. But what I found personally when playing through the video game, and what made me stop doing it, and I'm afraid that this will be the same case with this more expensive board game, certainly more expensive than the free that I got it for on PS4 on the PS Plus, is that this eventually outstays its welcome. For me, the variation was the different characters. I really enjoyed playing through all the different characters and experiencing their play styles and seeing what cards I could add to my deck from those specific characters' pools, and how that shifted as the game progressed and how that dealt with different enemies. That I found was really, really fun when I played through Slay the Spire. But it was only fun until a point, right? And maybe that's fine. This again goes back to the question of replayability, which I feel I've talked about quite a lot on this channel, or hypothesized about, or asked you all about. But my worry is, when is that roguelike atmosphere going to get stale? And if you are playing cooperatively, the thing about the video game is that you're playing solo, and so you get to really experience all the character classes on your own. But if you're playing with 3 or 4 players, you get to see all the characters interact, and you get to see what's sort of unlocked for each one. I'm also not sure how the unlock system works if you completed a run with all 4 characters, which is supposed to be a little bit easier than without. Do you get to unlock everything quicker and then just unveil all the mystery? How long is that roguelike aspect of repeating the same thing over and over again with variances? I understand there's variances between the different monsters, etc. But how long is that going to last you, and will you feel like you got your $100 worth? Because this is $110. Shipping's around $12. Shipping is great. I always harp on shipping. Shipping is fantastic for this sort of game in this climate. You'd think that the game was actually $90 MSRP and it was $22 shipping. That's how good it is. But how long will that progression last you, and do you see yourself getting stale with it, especially if you're a fan of the video game and have already experienced those tweaks and progressions over and over again, some people at that 200+ hour level? A question I can't answer, but you can. Hopefully, or something to consider before you really dive full force into spending your money on this product. This is for the people who, would be upset if they spent $100 on a game and only played it four times. Now, moving along to number 3, and this could change as the campaign progresses. I hope it changes as the campaign progresses. I hope this is an unlock that they haven't talked about yet. But the storage system, as it's currently being shown, seems incredibly lacking for the amount of switching things back and forth that you're going to want to do. There are 4 different types of monsters. There are 4 different starting characters. There are 4 different classes of card. There are item cards and relic cards and all sorts of different cards. And the fact that they haven't showcased any sort of storage system, especially again at this $100 level, seems absurd to me. We might as well talk about price while we're here. I was hoping that this game would be $60. I was really hoping, because I knew it was just going to be cards, right? I was really hoping that it would just be $60. And it isn't. It's at that much higher Kickstarter premium price. And for that price, I would hope that they had considered setup and tear down a little bit more than it seems that they have. I was gonna be very angry about the sleeves being auto-included into the game for those who want it cheaper and want it at that lower price point, but this is a decision, a mechanical decision, because in order to upgrade one of your cards, the upgraded portion of that card is just on the back, because as you go throughout the game, you get to upgrade certain cards. You can say, okay, I'll upgrade this card in my deck and make it the stronger version. And having those on the back side of the decks, rather than having a whole other deck that you have to search through and sort through after, I think this is really quite ingenious. I do. I think they should be commended for this as well, because it makes that gameplay a little bit more accessible. And I think their focus on the gameplay being accessible is good, but I also know that every time you proceed to a new act, you need to switch out some of the monsters and some of the first encounters and make the monsters a little bit more difficult because presumably your characters have gotten stronger, right? Having all of these different sorts of cards and no mention of an innovative storage solution as innovative as their sleeve technique gets me a little bit concerned as to the actual flow and upkeep of a game, and I think for a game that's just primarily cards and costs $100, I personally expect more. So that's reason number 3, the storage solution isn't completely thought out. You're gonna have to invest in your own and therefore increasing the price. Maybe that is a bar that you don't want to go over. Now, reason number 2, unfortunately, is a big one, and this is a reason that I have never had to even think of in any of the 5 reasons you shouldn't back. And I've been doing this for a long time, over a year now, on every campaign that's raised over $1 million. And I'll say that reason number 2 you shouldn't back Slay the Spire is because they're not ready for this size of a campaign. Unfortunately, and I say this with the most empathy possible, this starting day was one of the most poorly managed campaign starts that I have ever seen on Kickstarter. And I'm not trying to hyperbolize here. It was bad. The campaign page was severely lacking from the beginning. They had to be reminded to put a rule book up. They weren't showcasing the sleeves or why they even existed until people started talking about it in the comments. They didn't have a "we're funded" update even prepped. Instead, you got 2 paragraphs saying, oh wow, we're funded. Okay, we'll definitely have some things coming out further on. They then announced that their stretch goals were going to start at $1 million, and then they got backlash and just removed that from the campaign page, and then they switched to the daily reveal model so that they could say, hey, we're not going to make artificial stretch goals. You've actually hit them all, so we'll do the daily reveals. And that's all fine. I think they have course corrected very well, but there's just no reason why these things weren't thought out since the beginning. And keep in mind, this campaign has been in the works for a little while. Back in January 2021, we thought this was coming in spring 2021. And then that came around, and then it was summer 2021. And then that came around, and then it was coming soon. And then a full year later, or I don't know when it came up, then it was November 1st, and finally it launched on November 1st, 2022. This campaign page, or this game, has been potentially in the works for almost 2 years in an environment where Kickstarter is a big business. There is no excuse for the start that they've had right now. And the lack of communication and the lack of ability to showcase their game to the actual public. And it is surprising to me that it has raised over $1 million, and I know that is based solely upon the IP and people having goodwill for this IP and people enjoying the video game, and having nothing to do with the campaign page, because this campaign page has just been really absolutely atrocious. And again, they've corrected well. I think they've absolutely corrected well, and they're making the right steps, and that is for sure very, very heartening to me, and I think they are in the right direction, but it also makes me lose a lot of faith that they can get this done properly. This is Contention Games, their second Kickstarter ever, or at least that's what it says on the Kickstarter page, and I'm not trying to pick on the little guy here. I'm really thrilled for them and their team that they got this contract, and I'm sure it's going to send them to new heights, and that is very exciting for me, and on a human level, I am really, really happy for them. But they haven't shown that they can handle a campaign of this size. As for the designers listed for this game, We have two people who don't have credits on Board Game Geek because they are the designers behind Slay the Spire and behind that big phenomenon. And hey, they designed that whole system. It's basically that system. I'm not worried that this game isn't going to be good. I'm just worried about the potential lack of experience of the team that is evidenced by this campaign page and by this really rocky start. And so that makes me a little bit fearful going forward that this campaign will deliver on time, that there won't be unforeseen difficulties, that the shipping cost is actually the shipping cost. This is all hearsay, and it may not come to pass, but the pessimist in me knows that there could be unexpected complications, and they have proved that they're willing and able to deal with those unexpected complications and put forward something better. So it's great that they can work on the fly, but the lack of thought and forethought when it comes to this campaign, something that they've known was coming for, again, almost 2 years, the lack of information present on the campaign page at its initial launch, the fact that they've had to be guided by their backers as to what standard things people want to see on a Kickstarter campaign page, the fact that there is right now no gameplay section on the campaign page. There's 2 paid previews of how to play and there's 2 reviews. That's it. And then a note that shows us the best shipping that Kickstarter has ever seen in the past couple years. We know with the popularity of the video game that this will go to retail. That's a bet that I'm willing to make. People will want this at that retail level. I think we'll see it in stores. I don't know what's going to be exclusive from this campaign, if anything, because it's really not clear. I don't know what the incentive really is for backing now versus waiting for retail. And there might be incentive because that shipping cost is low, and if it really is hitting the stores at $100 MSRP, then you're probably getting a better deal purchasing it now. But for my money, the way it started, I would look at this campaign with a little bit more skepticism and don't let your enthusiasm for the IP drive solely your wallet. And I think that's what it's doing for a lot of people. And I think that could be a big mistake. And that moves on to reason number 1, which we talked about a little bit earlier at the very beginning of this, which is obviously, is it different enough from the video game to warrant purchasing? Or why not just play the video game or get the video game for $15 instead of this experience? And for my money, after reading through the rulebook, I don't see a reason. The only reason I can see is if you enjoy that physical aspect of gaming more than a virtual aspect of gaming. If you look at screens all day and don't want to look at more screens and want to enjoy this system that you have invested a lot of joy into, yeah, then I think that's a back. I think that's worthwhile getting it. For me, I don't see any reason why I would even play this cooperatively with some other people rather than just let the computer handle the math, potentially have a more exciting journey, not have to worry about the setup and teardown and constantly flipping and upgrading the cards, letting something automate that for me. I don't see a noticeable difference here, even in that co-op game, than I would get from the video game. I just don't. I don't see any difference. I think the video game is fun, but I also think that I lost interest in the video game fairly quickly. I know a little bit more quickly than a lot of people out there. And there's nothing really about the co-op that elevates that experience. I love how they're managing the upkeep. I love it's that single die roll that applies to everyone's stuff and things happen. I think that's great. You don't have to make an individual die roll and see what happens because it doesn't matter. Random's random, right? But I also don't care that I can have somebody else who can attack my minion. Because that's basically all it is. With the 4 players, you'll have 4 sets of little monsters that pop out, and then you can all fight the big bad together. Where if it's just you just have 1 set of monsters that pop out. So in essence, you're playing your own row, your own little solo game alongside everyone else. And then at points can reach into their lane and go whoosh, and punch their goblin in the face. And I like that because then you can protect your characters who are getting low on health. And that does seem like a fun little tweak, but it doesn't seem fun enough to warrant doing that. I have a lot of co-op deck builders that I like and enjoy. I have a lot of co-op deck builders where I can save someone's health from getting hit. Slay the Spire to me will always be that video game 1-player experience, and I'm perfectly comfortable with it living in that mode. And nothing that this game has shown anything different than that experience. And on one hand, again, that might make you pull the trigger and say, yes, that's exactly what I wanted. You know they've achieved perfection before, and now you just have it in board game form. And I think that's great. If that's you, well, maybe the other reasons don't apply as well. Although I would still be mindful of number 2 and letting your excitement get ahead of you. Maybe number 2 should have been number 1. Honestly, I didn't want to pick on them that much by making it the number 1. But yeah, I just don't think that co-op experience will be different enough. And for me with my games, I look for things that give me a different experience than something I already own. If I already own it, I'm just going to play that thing that I know that I like, rather than play it in a way that's going to take longer and monopolize my game night when I can only get people together on certain nights of the week. I'm gonna save Slay the Spire for when I'm by myself and my friends don't have time, or I don't have the time, or it's 2 at night and I wanna wind down and play something. Yeah, that's when I'll play Slay the Spire. For my board game nights, I'm probably gonna play something else that I don't have the opportunity to play, and I think that distinction is important, or at least it is for me. So there you go. Those are my 5 reasons you shouldn't back Slay the Spire. If you're still here, why not click that subscribe button? It would mean a friggin' heck of a lot to me. And if you hate me, know that the more subscribers I get means the more emails I'm gonna receive, the more mediocre games I'm gonna have to play, and it'll just mean a lot more work for me, honestly. So do that if you want my life to be busier than it already is, and me to play less games and spend less time doing things I love more. But for everyone, make sure you write in the comments below your reasons why you're backing or why you're not backing. I find that these videos really serve well to exist as this nice balance of both sides, and perhaps your opinion can sway people in the correct direction that you know is the correct direction, and not the direction that idiot me is directing them, or the same direction. I don't know, could be either. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you all. My name's Chris George, and I don't have a catchphrase, but I do have an inkling to not wait 1.5 years to play Slay the Spire, and just go over to my TV and maybe play a bit of it. Thanks again for being here. I love you. I do. I hope you're not having too horrible a day, and I'll see you in the next video.